Hi everyone.
Hello.
Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Heaney Hunter, Associate Professor of Theology and Religious Studies. She has been teaching Christian marriage at St. John's since 1987. As an expert, has authored books on Christian marriage. Her books include Mirror of God's Love, Sacramental Marriage and the Difference It Makes, and Unitas, Preparing for Sacramental Marriage, and Couple Workbook and Leader Guide. Our discussion will focus mainly on family, specifically the family as a domestic church.
Dr. Hunter, we can imagine that it is easy enough for you to explain the concept of domestic church to your Christian students. How do you explain the meaning of domestic church so that all of these students, Christian and non-Christian students, understand and can relate to?
I think that's a wonderful question. And of course, I've been teaching here at St. John's since 1987, which is 25 years. And so over the years, many of my students have been non-Christian. So what I've tried to do over the years is figure out ways to help students understand that very Catholic concept of domestic church. What I've come to is an idea that maybe refers to it this way. If we talk about the family as a place where we build faith, or a family as a household of faith, then it really doesn't matter what the religion is. So you as a Muslim would know what it means to have faith in your family. You would have your traditions that would be related to the Muslim faith. You would have your rituals that are connected with your faith. You would have family celebrations that are connected to faith. So whether or not somebody is Christian doesn't really matter much. Faith can be built in every family. And what's most important to me is that a family is built, a family has its foundation, not just on something secular, but on God in their midst. And so whether somebody is Jewish or Muslim or Christian, everyone that believes in God can have faith in their families, whether or not it's seen specifically as a church. The other thing, even for my Catholic students, sometimes there are Catholic students that don't go to church all that often. And so what they might say is, well, why would I want to be like the church? I don't like the church. I don't go to church. Church is boring, whatever young adults say. And I mean, I have 2 young adult children, and so I've heard these things over the years in addition to hearing them from my students. But even Catholic students that are not connected with the church could find a way to believe and support the idea of domestic church, because what it means is that the family builds itself on belief in God and acts as if God matters in their lives. I hope that answers your question.
The magisterium views the family as a traditional Christian couple and their children who live their lives according to God's plan and according to the scripture and tradition. But the world is constantly changing, and so are the composition and values of the families. In his writings, Pope John Paul II seems to be speaking only of traditional family, made up of a father, mother, and their biological children. Whereas the U.S. bishops, though they uphold the traditional family views, they are more open to other kinds of families in their 1993 document titled Follow the Way of Love. By non-traditional families, we mean single mother families, or single father families, divorced families, extended families, blended family, and other kinds of families. Now, it seems that in his writings, Pope John Paul II is not that welcoming of the other kinds of families, such as single families. What do you think of the Pope's approach versus the U.S. bishops on family and families?
Okay, let me just broaden this out a little bit. In 2010, the U.S. bishops also came out with another document on family. And what's interesting is that that document was probably a little bit more skewed toward the traditional family than Follow the Way of Love was. Just a little bit of information. I was an advisor to the Bishops' Conference when Follow the Way of Love was written, and I was a part of the conversation and the discussion that led to that document. So, of course, I think that that's a wonderful document. But let's kind of trace this back just a little bit. We talk about the traditional family as if it's always been that way. What you have to remember is that in many societies over the centuries, family had different sorts of shapes and looks. So, for example, in the time of the Hebrew scripture, before the time of Christ, in Israelite and Jewish culture, it was very typical for a man to have maybe 5 or 6 wives. And so the family would not just be father, mother, and biological children, but it would be husband, many wives. Sometimes if a husband could not afford wives but didn't have enough children to tend his flocks or farm his fields, he might take on other women as well. They were called concubines, and a concubine was sort of an approved sexual partner that would become a part of the family and would produce children for the head of the household. So all I'm saying is that family has not always looked exactly the same. What became the traditional family was a mother and a father and biological children. Of course, as time has gone on, over the centuries, many families adopted children. So it wasn't just biological children that were part of a family. And of course, in many cultures through the history of especially European society, sometimes people didn't get married, and sometimes it was two unmarried partners with their children. So there's always been diversity in the shape of family. What I would say is that John Paul holds up as an ideal the tradition of mother, father, children, and John Paul also holds up a very traditional perspective on motherhood as a woman's primary vocation. So he does hold a rather traditional line from the Christian European tradition. What I would say is that the world is a very different place now. And I think that what we need to recognize is that domestic church or family of faith or household of faith, whatever you want to call it, can look very different in different circumstances. So it may be that there's a single mother who's raising her children to believe in God, to pray, to be good to people, to take care of each other. How could we ever say that that family is not a household of faith? It would be very wrong for us to say that.
We also know from Dr. Washburn that you prepare couples who are going to be married. Is it that what is part of the pre-kind process? Would you be able to tell us what that entails?
Almost all of my work, I should, not almost all of it now, but a lot of my work has been done with couples preparing for marriage. I believe that good preparation for marriage is one of the most important things that we can do for couples. I believe that it's really important for couples to learn how to communicate with each other, to learn how to solve their problems. I believe it's very important that they know how to deal with issues like money, like in-laws, children, faith. I think all of those issues need to be addressed, maybe not completely worked out, but addressed before a couple gets married. I don't know if Professor Washburn told you this, but in addition to being a PhD, I have a PhD in theology, but I'm also a licensed mental health counselor in New York State. So I have a mental health credential as well. So a good bit of the work, the pastoral work that I do, is helping couples either before marriage or afterwards as their marriage counselor. And what I find is that many of the issues that couples have when they come to me in marriage counseling are things that they probably should have addressed before they were married. So, pre-Cana, now just think about where it comes from. Cana was the place where Jesus celebrated his first miracle, the wedding feast at Cana. That's why we call marriage preparation pre-Cana. I would say that pre-Cana sessions, which tend to be informal meetings with married couples who probably are not specialists, I mean they're married, but they probably are not specialists, gives couples a very good idea of what it's like to be in a healthy marriage. You meet wonderful couples, they share their experiences. That's a good thing. I believe that the total of marriage preparation has to be way more than pre-Cana. So, for example, in the place where I live, which is Long Island, the Diocese of Rockville Center, one of the things that the diocese requires is that every couple that gets married completes a pre-marriage inventory. It's not really a test, but it's a lot of questions, about 156 to 180 questions. And what it does is it gets at a couple's issues, their areas of agreement and their areas of disagreement. Then the couple would sit down with someone like me and go through that inventory, and that really helps them identify the things that they need to talk about. Because, pre-Cana is kind of one size fits all. Everybody comes in, they have an interesting discussion about communication or maybe money, maybe sexuality, but until a couple knows what their own issues are, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. The other piece of marriage preparation that I think is really important is that couples really should think about the kind of ceremony that they want to have.
Yeah. Do most of those who come for pre-Cana know that in the marriage, the groom and bride, later on their children, become a domestic church? And how do you make the pre-Cana couples understand the concept of domestic church? Is there anything in the pre-Cana that emphasizes being a domestic church to couples?
Do they know it when they come? I would say most of them probably don't. And the reason I say that is because most young couples, I don't want to say every young couple, but many of them come to the church for marriage after they've been away from the church for a number of years. We don't have a lot of couples that are regular churchgoers right up until the time they get married. They kind of take some time off, they take a step back, they're not really involved. Their religious education ended maybe when they were in 7th or 8th grade. So this kind of conversation about building a household of faith, that's not something that you would talk about with a 7th or 8th grader. So unless their families have talked about this with them, or unless they see their parents as heads of a domestic church, I think most people don't really understand that. I think that many people, for whatever reason, believe that their house of worship is the best place for them to be married. They may not even know why, but somehow, in some way, their religious tradition affects the way they want to get married. So even if they're not real churchgoers, they still somehow believe that church is the right place for them to be married. So I would say, maybe on one level, they know that their faith tradition is connected. I think in many cases, they are not aware of this idea of domestic church, which is why you have marriage preparation, so that you can talk about those things on an adult level rather than on a level of religious education.
Learn that parents, by their works and actions, are the first teacher of the faith and to their children. It goes without saying that they are the ones from whom children learn to behave and learn about God from. It is the home where religious vocations are fostered. We imagine that a two-queer family may find it difficult to be a domestic church because of time restraints, especially when both the mother and father are working. They have so much stress from trying to balance family with work and religious duties. What advice can you give to such a couple who may feel guilty that they cannot be with their children as much as they would like?
First of all, I would say to all of you young men and women out there, no guilt. You will find ways to be there for your children, to be good parents, to balance home and career. Now, what can happen is that you have people who say, my career comes first, last, and always, or I have to have everything that I want before I can spend any time with my children. My daughter, and I'm sure Professor Washburn didn't tell you this, but my daughter and son-in-law had a baby 6 weeks ago. So we have a new baby in our family. My daughter is home on maternity leave for a few months, but she will be going back to work at the end of January. And you really have to work hard to figure out how you can balance career and family. And of course, there will be sacrifices that you make sure that neither side is neglected. I remember when my husband and I were talking about our own decision to be two working parents, because we always both worked outside the home. And what we decided was that we would both pursue teaching careers, and that way we had a lot of flexibility to be with our children. My older daughter, is a social worker, and she works in a hospital. So one of the things that she's doing to make the work-family balance a little better is that she's working 3 12-hour shifts a week instead of 9 to 5 for 5 days. So that gives her more time at home with the baby. My son-in-law is a teacher, and so he's off in the summer. So when she's working in the summer, he's home with the baby. But when you think about it, there are so many ways today that workplaces are trying to accommodate people. You can telecommute, you may be able to time shift so that you're working flexible hours. There are so many more ways now to balance work and family. I think that it takes some creativity. I think it takes some juggling, but I think it's really possible for you to do it.
Despite the fact that the divorce rates have increased exponentially, can we still use domestic church imagery to describe broken families?
I think that calling somebody broken family is judgmental. I know that's not how you meant it, but that's why I raised that. I think that divorce is a tragic situation. Nobody wants to be divorced. No couple that goes down the aisle in a church or in a synagogue or in a mosque or gets married in City Hall, nobody thinks that they are going to be a divorce statistic. Everybody starts out with the best of hopes and the best of intentions. So what I would say is that every family has some brokenness. Every family, regardless of how perfect they may seem, carries some stuff with them. Whatever it is. Could be family history, could be a drug problem, could be alcoholism, could be, being a workaholic. Every family has some problems. And so in that sense, every family has a little bit of brokenness. But every family, whether the marriage is intact or not, has the opportunity and the potential to be a family of faith, because it's the way you bring God into the family, it's the way you treat each other, it's the way you make sure that faith gets integrated into the life of the family. That's what makes you a domestic church or a household of faith, not whether you're divorced or not.
Can we ask you something personal? Professor Washburn tells us that you and your entire family include the families of your daughters, and are very involved in the church, that the church is practically your second home. She cannot think of a better model for domestic church than your extended family. How does your family live up to be a domestic church?
You know, that's very nice and it's very flattering, but as I just said, no family is perfect. I am very, very blessed because both of my daughters and their husbands continue to be an important part of our church community. Both of my girls continued to be active members in the church as they were growing up, when they came back from college, when they got married. That's always been a part of our faith. The other piece that has kept our family involved in the church is that we do church service together. So one of the things that we do together is we do music in the parish together. My older daughter was a French horn major in college. Her husband was a trombone major, and they met playing music together. My younger daughter is a voice major, and her husband is a fine artist. And so they all have found ways to work together in service for the church. So like last summer, we put on a show in the parish, and my one son-in-law designed the set, my other son-in-law directed the music, my daughter was the director of the play. We do things together in the context of faith, and that's something that I think is very special, and maybe it's unique. You know, maybe a lot of people don't do that, but we've always made faith a priority. Even now, with everybody married and with the new baby in the family, we try to have Sunday dinner together. We make sure that we have conversations about faith together. It's just something that's grown up over years and years of being part of our faith together. It's never too late to start, but I would say for couples that are young, thinking about getting married, thinking about being partners with each other, one of the things that you can always do is start the faith traditions with your family at a very young age. And then they think it's normal. Then they think this is what you do. And hopefully my daughters will be passing on the faith that we love so much to our next generation.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. And I hope this project goes really well for you.